Welcome, everyone, to Doceo, the podcast where you learn all about the history of extension. I'm your host, Patrick, here in the wonderful state of Colorado, podcasting from Greeley, Colorado, and we've got a great show for you today. We're going to look a little bit of the history of extension and show you all the amazing facts and really cool things that happen. So we'll get here started soon. Okay, so CSU is known as a land-grant university. Now, this all gets complex, and there's a little bit of, and I'm going to unfold this for you guys. So a land-grant university has been formed about as something from the federal government that has given land out to each state to form a university. Well, back then it was actually a college that they started, and the colleges became full-fledged universities in the end, and we'll go more deeper into that, which is an interesting story in itself. But the Extension Office is the arm of the university. It is what the Office of Engagement and Extension does for the university, bringing the research to all around the world and to the communities and to the people who live within them. So Extension's mission, and from the strategic plan of 2022 to 2026, it names that the strategic mission of Extension is to help people make informed decisions by sharing information from a variety of fields, including agriculture, natural resources, and health. So going back to the land-grant university, it all started back in 1862 under the Morrill Land Grant Act. And this gave land grants to colleges so that they can teach, and they can teach in fields that are related to agriculture and the mechanic arts, as well as other scientific and classical studies. So from there, you have 4 agencies of the state that's assigned to CSU. You have the Colorado Agricultural Experiment Station, the Colorado State University Extension, which we're talking about today, and the Colorado State Forest Service and the Colorado Water Institute. And so CSU is obviously, as a university, is engaged with education and research, and CSU has a lot of work in bringing that to the communities as well. So, going to the Morrill Act, let's unfold this little history, and then we'll go from the historical point of view, and then we'll go into more what it is now. So the Morrill Act of 1862, if you can imagine yourself living in that time when people were moving west, and they were traveling west. There was a gold rush in California and even parts of Denver and Colorado, and people were traveling. Now, most, I just went on a trip to Minnesota, and it took us a couple of days by car to travel. But back then, it would take 4 to 6 months to travel across the land. Now, that was a incredible amount of time and a big feat to be able to undertake. But yet it was also encouraged to go west and to go build communities and to and build a nation in that way. So I want to talk to you about a little bit of the Morrill Act. So the Morrill Act gave allocated land based on the number of senators and representatives of each state in Congress. So they were distributing land to different states. And as I discuss this, I will put in the show notes this article that I came upon that talks about the misconceptions of the early land-grant colleges. Wonderful, fascinating read. And I'll go through some of the points that he talks about. But government, under the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, led to the practice of giving newly admitted states 2 entire townships for a seminary of learning. And so they were giving land out for a while. And this is obviously years before the Morrill Act of 1862, so 1787, so roughly a few decades, 60 years or so, that they were disseminating land to these newly admitted states. And so by the time of the Civil War, they had already given out land to about 17 different states. So it's not, there's a misconception that thinks that that the Morrill Act was the first act that started this whole train of distributing land. Well, the Northwest Ordinance was doing that already. So what is unique about the Morrill Act? So what's unique about Senator Morrill's great contribution, even though it wasn't in starting the land distribution, it was to create this political alliance, establish a national policy, and as Johnson says, he says, an irresistible incentive for all states to join a countrywide system-based institution that had the potential to what we know today. And that is something new and incredible. So to think about this, universities were starting to pop up, but this was the first time that it was a collective, universal, and that was countrywide system. It was a system of colleges that was being created. And that is something that is hallmark to the Morrill Act. Now, Senator Morrill was not the developer of all of the ideas. Actually, a lot of the ideas that he had came from a man named Jonathan Baldwin Turner. And he authored a plan that was called the Granville Plan of 1851. And much of the Morrill Act is actually attributed to some of his ideas that came in that plan. And he wanted to create a political movement calling for the creation of agriculture colleges, which is what happened through the Morrill Act. Now, Turner actually met Abraham Lincoln, and one of the Green brothers brought him in contact with Abraham Lincoln, who was helping with a harvest on the Green farm. And Lincoln had heard of Turner's teachings and became very interested in it. Now, Turner was a scholar. He was a classical scholar, taught some Latin and things. He was also an ordained minister and a professor, and he was against abolition of slavery, or he was a campaigner for abolition of slavery, and a political activist. So he kind of maybe set the seeds in Abraham Lincoln's ears to these development of the colleges, and Abraham Lincoln actually signed the bill in 1862 after a failed attempt previously that didn't go through. But there are other players in this too. There's a man named Horace Greeley who actually is the founder of Greeley, Colorado, from which this podcast is coming from you today. And Greeley, Colorado was named after him, and he was a New York publisher and a politician who visited the area in 1859, and he wanted to create a settlement for utopian colony. And he is famous for saying, "Go west, young man." So you can think about telling all of his friends to go west and go explore and go on those journeys, as treacherous as it was. And we'll talk a little bit more of scurvy and some of the dangers that would happen in these journeys. Like I said, the Morrill Act was to teach agriculture and mechanical arts. And the idea was that is for the working class or the common person, not necessarily for the wealthy who could obtain a liberal arts or practical education. So that was unique as well to these colleges as well. And the colleges, actually, today, these standards would become the largest college. They become the universities. So the success of these colleges have become enormous, including that they supplied 8 of the 10 largest undergraduate campuses in the United States are land-grant universities. And 2 out of every 3 doctoral degrees are granted from state universities. And that's a pretty powerful, powerful statement if you look at that. But the history of these land grant universities was far from being as ideal of a success as you would think. Now, Horace Greeley was a tycoon. He had the largest newspaper in the United States, and he actually ran for president, and he ended up losing against Ulysses S. Grant. So this man, powerful man, very interesting about him to read about him, and the founder of this wonderful city of Greeley that we live in. The reason for the schools not being as successful in the beginning, perhaps there are many, but one of them is that a lot of these land was being distributed to these colleges that were taking up and building upon the land. But at that time, it didn't have a system of education already in place. There are very few high schools that were already in place, so they were accepting and admitting students that may not have had an elite type of education to be able to stand up to some of the teachings that they were being taught. They had a basic, less than high school education, and the colleges were admitting these students. So that may have been contributed to a lot of the initial quality of the education that they were receiving. But for the student that was going to them, it was ideal. It was perfect because, like I said, it was for the working class. It was for the general public to attend these universities. And as we'll discuss later, there was a general progression to lead these universities to a higher level each year after year. And so there's a progression to it. So to illustrate this, they called the University of Wisconsin. It was nicknamed the High School for the Village of Madison. So you can see the university was called a high school, nicknamed a high school. And then the Pennsylvania State University also called it the Farmers High School. So you can see there's the level that they've attributed to this what would become a very prestigious and a high level once it becomes fully fledged in what we know it is today. A second obstacle that the universities faced at this time was that there's a lot of hostility between the university and the farm community that was plagued that administration for 50 years. Another issue that they faced was that farmers looked with suspicion on the very concept of agricultural education. In fact, the word agriculture and college were sometimes would bring people to chuckle and laugh because they seemed like they were opposed and they didn't really fit in the same bucket. So, and this is something that even continues today. A lot of times the university level professors and the farmers will not really coincide and really agree on many levels. And so there can be a lot of tension between that. And that brings me to the story of when Chancellor Tony Frank came to Greeley to visit, and he came to Plum Farms, and he told us a story of how when he was president of CSU, he came to Weld County Commissioners, and they really didn't welcome CSU. And there was a chance that the extension office would not continue or start going forward because the idea came that how could these people in suits in university and research come and tell a farmer how to work the land? How could they tell them? And so there's a lot of times there's a lot of tension between that, and it still even happens today. Um, some of the research and things that are found to be successful or proven, a lot of farmers will say, well, these are tried and true methods that we've farmed the land for generations after generations, that we don't need any of these new techniques or new researches that are coming through. Yet that is just one side, and there are many different levels to that. And I'm sure there are definitely different kind of farming techniques that have come through today, but it was a real slow process to be able to convince. In fact, that's how 4-H started. Was that 4-H was hoping to get to the farmers, and they had to go to the children first and begin working on canning tomatoes, and often empty fields were transformed for the kids to learn to harvest on, and it ended up a lot of they found that a lot of the farmers were noticing that their kids were um, producing crops that were better than theirs, and so it looked like that this was a way, an avenue for to bring this research to the parents and to the farms was through the kids. And so 4-H began its humble beginnings in such a manner of creating clubs. And so, and that is, of course, one of the focus areas of extension as well. So despite these challenges of farmers being very hesitant to trust federal expansion, and yet it took years and years and decades to finally open the doors and really see the college system was ahead of their times. They had an ideal more than perhaps a practicality, and their ideal came to fruition decades later, and it blossomed, and it became a magnificent structure, a magnificent system of colleges that we know today. Like I said, there are 8 out of the 10 colleges are premier in the United States, and so, but it took a lot of effort, and in fact, there are a lot of students that didn't apply, or they didn't go to the college, and so there was a lot of struggling rates of number of enrollment into these colleges in the very beginning. In some cases, the agriculture generally fared better, especially when it was separated from the state university. And in places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Mississippi, Massachusetts, and Kansas, where agriculture was the driving force, they fared a little bit better. But Wisconsin, for example, graduated no student until 1878. And then 30 years after President Lathrop had begun urging agriculture education, 1 student was pursuing, while in contrast, you had 60 students pursuing law degrees. The second problem was that professors of agriculture could not be found. It was because the subject did not exist yet. So when we're talking about being ahead of their times, this is an example of it, where curriculum and everything had to be developed, and procedures and admittance of students, all of these were important, and they had to really struggle in the first years of their existence. And as Johnson points out, that when you read a history book and you learn about the economic history of America, which has become a focal point to other economies around the world, a lot of people are envious of what we have and the wonderful structure of the economy that has become the agricultural revolution that came about. So these histories give more attention to the natural conditions, inventions, canals, railroads, market developments, urbanizations, and land policies. And they give more emphasis to that than they do to the land grant education, which was created. And sometimes they give no reference to any of the education that existed at that time. And the universities could not be separated from all these inventions and all the system that they were part of. And they attributed much of the success to that. And so, as Johnson says, and I quote, "The direct development impact of the early colleges came after the agriculture experiment stations were established, after research knowledge was given an extension mechanism, after the engineering schools were equipped with well-patronized for both training and applied research, and after enrollments in the practicing professions generated thousands, not merely scores of leaders and specialists. It was a long road from the early unrealized ideal to the contemporary interlocking of development and education. The early colleges were within the system, not outside or above it." So you can see that in the history, the education is tied to a lot of what was happening and all of the successes. And it really took in America to be built in order for the school system to be built as well. Although you can say that the college system that was created relied heavily on other systems to be developed before it can really flourish and become the colossal premier figure that is doing such great work today. Back then, they were in the trenches, and there were a lot of great things that were happening. Now, some of the key values that they had was that they were improving the internal systems within, whether it's college, capital, penitentiary, insane asylum, and normal schools. They were uplifting high schools in particular, like we were talking about before, that there were no high schools that were in that area when the university or the college began in that area. So they were admitting youth that were still uneducated compared to other colleges. Now, to give an example of this, here in Colorado, Boulder High School in Boulder was the first high school in the state. And that happened, their graduating class happened in 1876. And this school was originally established in 1875 as a preparatory school for the University of Colorado. So the school, as you can see, the first high school happened in 1875. And Colorado Agricultural College, which is back then known at what is today as CSU, started in 1870. So you can see that there weren't very much of a system that was happening with high schools in order to bring them to a university level education. And that's why when I was talking about a step-by-step progress, this incremental development of the system and of the education, slowly raising up the bar each time, each class each class that entered in, they were slowly raising the bar. There were more professors that were more adequately trained in teaching agriculture things, which never existed before. So this is a real pioneer thing of these professors and of these university and these college systems, that under the appearance that they were failing with very few admitted students, not so much interest, with contentions between the farmers and the professors, and this all was happening, and yet they were pioneers, and they were establishing a system and moving forward, knowing and walking towards an ideal. And that is pretty fascinating. So as a foreign observer, a man named Lord Bryce, he said it prophetically when he said, "True universities rather in aspiration than in fact." So you can see that they weren't a university in fact, they were aspiring towards it. And so with this step-by-step and progression, we have reached a more higher level of and to the fulfillment of what they planted the seeds back in the 1800s. And these people, they had to do it this way. They couldn't wait on a high school system to be set up and then introduce the college once they had enough learned people. If they didn't do it, then the reports would be that they were immeasurably impoverished. And as President Schaborn of Wisconsin said, he said, instead of telling the students what they ought to do, we must take them as they are and do the best we can with them. And that is pretty amazing. And another president of Virginia Agricultural and Mechanical College agreed with the same problem, said to seek the honor of diploma not placed so high as to be beyond their reach. So as Johnson talks about in this article, of all the misconceptions, thinking that it was a hit right at the beginning. No, they didn't have very many students enroll, and that there were no contentions, and it was easily placed in each state. No, there was a lot of contentions with farmers and the idea of going to a school. And to clear up these misconceptions is not about bashing or putting down the reality of the university system. It is actually confirming it from another perspective, as Johnson says it. And we really see that the humble beginnings of this college system that was introduced by the Morrill Act really shows that they've gone a long way, that for many of them, they were the high schools, they were the education system that existed in those newly formed states. And they were serving a need. There's a story of scurvy, and scurvy was widespread which is a malnutrition of not having enough vegetables and fruits. And scurvy was going widespread around, especially from sailors and people that were traveling. But it's also happened with the 4 to 6 month travel period that they would have to take to go west, as Greeley told every young person. He told them, go west. So you have this problem, scurvy, and you have the universities that are studying it, and a lot of 4-Hers began to can, and they started promoting canning just so that they can can fruits and vegetables so that they can have enough minerals so that they wouldn't get scurvy. And so that was one example of the immediate response towards this dilemma, and I think it's pretty fascinating. And so extension has become much more than agricultural focus, and they've broadened their perspectives in other areas as well. And some of the opportunities that extension offers, and these are the focus areas, which is 4-H and youth, agriculture, community and economic development, horticulture, food systems, natural resources, nutrition and food safety, and health and well-being. Focusing now on Colorado and our CSU, Land Grant University here at our hometown, we can look at the history of our first county extension agent. And this was D.C. Bascom of Logan County in 1912. And he started sharing farming techniques with homesteaders and teaching children to raise livestock and grow crops in kids' clubs. And that would become the basis of the 4-H club, which is now a large club, the largest in the United States at this moment. And so a little more of the history. CSU became a resource during agriculture downturns, and they changed soup kitchens, spaces into soup kitchens during the influenza outbreak, and really helped during World War II as well. Now, in Colorado, the agriculture started in the eastern plains and it kind of moved towards the western slope in areas where it's really hard to get moisture. I was reading about down in San Luis Valley where they have very little rainfall and they have to grab the water from the aquifers underneath. So irrigation and working in uneven terrains and things like that. Extension really had a big part in bringing in that new farming techniques. So it's a little more than just the eastern plains. And although they initially started focusing on crops and livestock production and issues that related to those things, they also started working with energy conservation, consumer education, and financial management. So, and to say that that the land-grant universities never had a role in economic impact would be incorrect to say, because a lot of the reasons was not just to bring an education to each state that was being developed, but also to enhance their economic growth. And so extension agents were working throughout the 20th century on planting seeds, plowing soils, animal husbandry, disease prevention. And one of the focus areas of 4-H and youth development was started in Clark County, Ohio in 1902. And it was the birthplace of the 4-H program. And the first club was called the Tomato Club or the Corn Growing Club. And a person named Jesse Field Shambaugh developed the clover pin with an H on each leaf. And in 1912, they were called 4-H clubs. Now, myself as an extension specialist and working in 4-H outreach, I have a pleasure being with the kids and teaching them all sorts of things from agriculture to science and STEM related fields. And it's an incredible moment when a child comes to you and says, Mr. Patrick, I wish that bee camp was every day, or I had the time of my life. And they tell you these things and you know that you're making an impact there. And as much as we are bringing research-based information and elevating their thoughts to higher concepts, critical thinking, and to practical things of how to plant a seed and how to grow it, or how kinetic energy works or potential energy. Whatever we're teaching them, we are teaching them nuggets of knowledge. But at the same time, we are transforming their hearts. We are giving them virtues of perseverance and work ethic and working together in a community and in a collaborative team. We're teaching them how to be leaders of tomorrow. And those are things that will change a generation, that will change a nation. And I think that perhaps a lot of extension's history is overlooked of those moments when they were in the grassroots, in the fields, in the trenches, working with their communities and making impacts. And I think that's where the real gold mine of extension is that they are in amongst communities and they've got their hands dirty and they're working on problems, solving problems, and trying to find solutions for their farmers, for their health specialists, for their 4-H youth, whoever it may be, they're working to serve. And a serving heart goes a long way in building a country. And so next time when you're looking for some research advice, go stop by the extension office and say hi. We'd love to share with you our thoughts and our research, what it has come to. And so here, Patrick Pulis from the Doceo podcast. And Doceo for Latin is teach. And so I'm happy to sign off tonight and wishing you all the best and take care.